This is the Mercedes-Benz G-Class, or the G-Wagon as it's popularly called. Now they say this is stronger than time itself, which is kind of true because it's been in production since 1979, and that makes it one of the longest running production names in the history of automobiles, alongside the likes of the Porsche 911, Toyota Land Cruiser and Ford Mustang. However, unlike those cars, this hasn't changed much from the original, because in its 45 years of existence, there have only been 2 generations of the G-Wagon. Now the question is, how has it made so far with so little change? And why it's still the most relevant Mercedes SUV out there? The development of the original G-Wagon began in the early 70s when the Shah of Iran asked Mercedes to develop a plucky 4x4 off-roader for military use. Rumor has it that he placed an order of 20,000 G-Wagons before it even made it to the drawing board, let alone the production line. After receiving the order, Mercedes was hard at work, and it took them over 5 years to release the first G-Wagon. The first-gen G-Wagon made its global debut in February 1979, which, quite ironically, was the same month when the Shah of Iran was removed from power thanks to the Islamic Revolution. Mercedes had now lost its biggest G-Wagon client. But it was a blessing in disguise, because the G-Wagon, as it turned out later, would go on to become one of the most desirable and capable SUVs in the world. Thanks to its rugged looks and solid 4x4 underpinnings, the G-Wagon quickly gained popularity among various nations' armies, civilians and even farmers. Soon its production was in full swing at Graz in Austria, and it was simply flying off the shelves. But having said that, the G-Wagon wasn't quite seen as a status symbol in the 80s, for it was still quite crude and basic. It was in the year 1990 though when it dawned on Mercedes that not a lot of countries were going to war, and there weren't enough farmers who were rich enough to afford a G-Wagon. So if the G-Wagon had to survive, it had to find new takers. And that's exactly what Mercedes did in 1990 as they launched the G463. Now that is the code name for what was the first generation of the G-Wagon as we know it today. This was the time when it moved from being a crude utilitarian off-roader to a luxury SUV that the rich and the well-heeled of the world will lust after for years to come. Now the G463 was the first G-Wagon that came with modern bells and whistles, which were equivalent to what was offered with the S-Class and the Range Rover at that point in time. So features like leather upholstery, modern tech and even ABS, which might not sound like a big deal today, but that was the first time that the G-Wagon got it. Now, of course, given what was on offer, given the off-road pedigree, and of course the name and the Mercedes brand, and of course the luxury on offer, the G-Wagon was lapped up by the customers worldwide, and it turned out into a global phenomenon. Now this continued for another 15 years before Mercedes decided that it was time to call quits on the G-Wagon. Yes, in 2006, Mercedes thought that the time was due for the G-Wagon to be replaced, and they decided that it was the end of the road for the G-Wagon. Well, turns out it wasn't quite the case. You see, Mercedes' original plan was to replace the G-Wagon with the GL series back in 2006. However, the demand was such that they couldn't put an end to the production of the G-Wagon. They sold it alongside the GL, which was supposed to be the successor of the G-Wagon. Now, of course, as of today, we know the GL as the GLS, but the G-Wagon is still on sale. So it is quite interesting and surprising to know that the car that was supposed to be put out of production in 2005 or 2006, it's still there in more or less the same shape. Now, even after the arrival of GL, the G-Wagon in its first generation continued to be on sale till 2018. Now for 2019, Mercedes had some big plans. They knew that they couldn't just stop the production of the G-Wagon because of the fan following or because of the demand. So then the smart thing, they updated the G-Wagon, as in they made it more modernized, and this time the changes were bigger because this was going to be the second generation model, which as we all know is the one I'm driving. So what was new on this version? Well, everything was, apart from the headlamp washers, the door handles and the spare wheel mount, everything was brand new on the second generation model. That's what Mercedes says. The platform was entirely new, everything was new, but inherently it was technically the same old car because it continued to have a ladder frame construction. It had again those 3 differential locks, it had 4 low range, it had 4-wheel drive, it had everything that the original had, but this time it was refined. Now the shape was more or less the same and it's really hard to differentiate it from the original, but you'll notice that this one looks a little softer at the front and it also has a longer nose, slightly longer nose because of updated pedestrian safety norms. So those are the only 2 changes, but in essence the G-Wagon looks as G-Wagon as it always did. Now the biggest change came underneath because this one for the first time featured independent suspension. So the solid axle at the front was gone and in place you now get double wishbone independent suspension. And similarly, because of the change in suspension, they also had to remove the old recirculating ball type steering with the new rack and pinion setup, which is more modern. Now at the back it still has a solid axle, but overall the dynamics have improved vastly because this car, well, it's now more in tune with the times, as in it's meant for red carpet than war zones, and as a result it drives really well. It has improved ride and handling on the road, and off-road it's still as capable. Of course, not a lot of people are going to get down and dirty with their 2 or 3 crore rupee SUV, so that's not the case, but if you intend to do so, it can do that. Now the other thing about the new G-Wagon, the second generation model, was of course the fact that it was more refined. There are better engine options with it, but like I said, the essence was not lost. So it was a master stroke, and the best bit of course was that it felt like a Mercedes inside. Now, of course, in terms of ride and handling, it's not like a GLS. It doesn't behave like a car, but overall, it is really hilarious the way this car handles because it is unbelievable. It feels in control all the time. Yes, you can hit around 200 kilometers per hour, but still it feels completely in control. The only thing that tells you that you're doing crazy speeds is probably the wind blast that you get from the slab-sided windshield. Otherwise, there is absolutely no telling that this is a G-Wagon, a body-on-frame SUV, because the way it handles, the way it steers also for a car of this shape and size, it is phenomenal. The other thing that is impressive, it's the ride quality. Now, yes, it's not as plush as a GLS, but at the same time, it's not that it's wobbly or it's bouncy all the time. I'm on a highway right now, I'm doing close to 120 kilometers per hour, and it feels quite tight down. There are a lot of bumps on this road. Of course, there is that side-to-side movement, but overall, it feels perfectly fine to me. I mean, I can see myself living with this kind of setup effortlessly. There is absolutely no problem at all. Yes, on bad roads, there is like a lot of movement, like I said, and there is no air suspension on offer with this car. It still gets adaptive dampers, but overall, who's complaining? If I have one complaint about the G-Wagon, well, it is the engine on this one, because this one is powered by a diesel engine. Now this is called the G400D, so it's powered by a 3-liter 6-cylinder engine. Buttery smooth, silky transitions, the 9-speed gearbox is phenomenal, the refinement levels are off the charts. It is a great engine. The performance is also quite brisk, and it is a quick accelerating car despite the fact that it weighs nearly 2.5 tons. But I don't think it's mad enough. I don't think it does justice to the G-Wagon experience, because this car, well, the whole purpose of this vehicle is to be mad, and I think that engine is a little subdued. It's a little mellow for the kind of experience that you're seeking in a G-Wagon. So if you want to go all out, if you want that typical G-Wagon drama, I think the V8 is what makes more sense, the one that comes in the G63, because that is a mad engine. This car deserves that sort of noise, that sort of drama, that sort of soundtrack that is just mind-blowing. So I think if you're looking for the complete G-Wagon experience, it's the V8 engine that you should opt for, because that engine is barking mad, and that's what makes the whole G-Wagon experience come to life. So without the V8, the G-Wagon feels like watching The Godfather dubbed in Hindi. You know, you see Marlon Brando, but what you hear is Amitabh Bachchan. So something gets lost in translation. That impact, that complete mafia vibe is not there. I had that kind of money where I could afford a G-Wagon. I definitely go for the V8 version. Now, of course, having said that, there is a new G-Wagon that's coming in, and it comes with an electric powertrain for the first time. So, of course, that's the latest G-Wagon that is going to come out in 2025, especially in India. But the good news is it also retains the G63 version with the same V8. Among other new updates in the refreshed G-Wagon, there is new dual 12.3-inch screens which feature the latest MBUX infotainment system. And this basically means that for the first time you get a touchscreen in the G-Wagon. And I have to say that it was desperately needed, because the age-old command system in our test car is quite irritating and finicky to use, especially when you're driving. As for other creature comforts, the current version has everything that you'd want in a 3 crore SUV, so there's not a whole lot more that the updated version will bring to the package. All good things must come to an end, but not the G-Wagon, because it is not a good thing, it's a total badass instead, which is why we all love it. It can stay around for another 45 years and we still won't be able to complain about its existence. The G-Wagon, well, it is stronger than time, like they claim. I just can't stop.